Step into the hushed aisles of Ashford's public library, where the tick of the grandfather clock and the rustle of turning pages hide a scandal about to burst into the open. The rain pattered softly on the library's tall windows that spring evening in 1954. Ashford's library, with its marble steps and oak-paneled walls, was the pride of the town, a place where children studied, professors lectured, and old secrets lingered between dusty shelves. Tonight, however, it was the center of excitement. The townsfolk gathered for a rare event, the unveiling of a long-lost manuscript by Elliot Harrow, one of America's most celebrated novelists, whose sudden death decades earlier had left his final work unfinished, or so everyone thought. The manuscript had been discovered in a locked trunk in Harrow's old summer home, and Ashford's library had been chosen for its debut reading. Among the guests was Clara Dane, a retired schoolteacher in her 60s with sharp gray eyes and a knack for noticing details others missed. Clara had taught many of the young people now grown, including the librarian himself, Mr. Lawrence Trent, who had invited her as an honored guest. "Miss Dane," Trent said warmly, adjusting his spectacles as he bustled about, "I'm glad you're here. You, of all people, will appreciate the gravity of tonight's event." Clara smiled. "I should hope so, Lawrence. I taught Elliot Harrow's novels for 20 years. To think there was a lost manuscript all this time." Before Trent could answer, a commotion rose near the reading dais. A sharp-eyed woman in a feathered hat, Mrs. Agatha Prynne, a wealthy collector, was pressing Trent with questions. "I was promised I'd be allowed to view the manuscript before the others," she huffed. "Patience, Mrs. Prynne," Trent said with forced courtesy. "It will be unveiled shortly, in front of everyone." Clara's eyes wandered to the locked glass case at the center of the room. There it was, the thick sheaf of yellowed pages, bound with ribbon. Even from a distance, the ink looked fragile, as if it might crumble at a touch. She shivered with anticipation. The clock struck 8. Trent stepped to the podium, cleared his throat, and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've been waiting for. Elliot Harrow's final manuscript, The Midnight Tides." He unlocked the glass case with a flourish, and gasped. The case was empty. Gasps rippled through the hall. Mrs. Prynne cried out, "Stolen." "I knew it." The crowd surged forward, voices rising in alarm. Trent stammered, pale as parchment. I checked it not an hour ago. It was here. Someone must have taken it." Clara Dane rose from her seat, her voice calm but firm. "Everyone stay where you are. No one leaves this room until we understand what has happened." The room froze, all eyes on her. For in that moment, Clara was no longer just a retired teacher. She was a woman stepping into the role she had always been meant to play, a detective. But as the crowd stilled, a sudden draft swept through the room, and the library's back door slammed shut, as if someone had just slipped into the stormy night. In Ashford's library, whispers turned to accusations as the vanished manuscript left more questions than answers. Who among the polite gathering was a thief in disguise? The oak-paneled reading room echoed with nervous murmurs. Clara Dane adjusted her spectacles, her sharp gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. Years of teaching had trained her to quiet unruly classrooms, and she used the same commanding presence now. "Everyone remain calm," she said, her voice firm. "The manuscript could not have vanished on its own. Someone here knows what happened." Mr. Trent, the librarian, wrung his hands. His normally neat hair was disheveled, and his voice trembled. "Miss Dane, I swear, I locked the case myself. The key never left my pocket." Clara's eyes fell on the glass case. Its lock was unbroken. No scratches, no sign of force. That meant whoever took the manuscript either had the key, or had found another way. She turned to the crowd. "We must account for everyone in the room. Who was nearest the case when the lights dimmed for the announcement?" Mrs. Agatha Prynne sniffed indignantly, feathers trembling on her hat. "I was, naturally. A manuscript of such importance belongs in private hands, not behind dusty glass. But I never touched it, Miss Dane. I was only admiring it." Clara arched an eyebrow. "Admiring from how close, Mrs. Prynne?" The collector bristled but said nothing further. A young man in a tweed jacket spoke next. "If you're implying Mrs. Prynne is guilty, then I must protest." His name was Victor Lennox, a graduate student from Boston University who had written several articles on Harrow's work. His youthful face was flushed with earnestness. "We scholars have waited years for this discovery. To suggest one of us would steal it is absurd. Clara regarded him coolly. And yet, Mr. Lennox, you left your seat twice during the evening. Once to fetch tea, and once, you claimed, to admire the library's architecture. Victor faltered, tugging at his tie. Well, yes, but surely you don't think. A woman's voice cut him off. I do. It was Sylvia Harrow, the novelist's niece, standing stiffly near the back row. Her resemblance to her famous uncle was unmistakable, the same sharp cheekbones and steady eyes. My family has lived with the rumors of this manuscript for decades. It has brought nothing but grief. Perhaps it should have stayed hidden. The room stirred at her words. Clara noticed the way she clenched her handbag, tightly, almost protectively. The storm outside lashed at the windows, thunder rolling across the night sky. Clara raised her hand for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot leap to conclusions. But one thing is clear. The thief may still be among us. The back door slammed shut moments ago, but with the weather, it is unlikely anyone got far. Just then, Officer Daniel Brooks, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, entered, his uniform damp from the rain. I heard the commotion from the square. What's going on? Clara briefed him quickly. Brooks frowned. So, we have a thief on the loose in a locked building, during a storm that's flooded half the roads. If that manuscript isn't here, it isn't far. Precisely, Clara said. We'll search the library room by room. And while we do, we'll learn who had the most to gain from its disappearance. The officer nodded. Then we start now. The guests shifted nervously, glancing at one another. Clara could feel the weight of hidden motives pressing in like the storm itself. Wealth, fame, family honor. Each was a reason strong enough to steal. As Clara prepared to lead the search, a scream rang out from the upper floor of the library. A voice cried, "He's here, in the archives." The hunt for the manuscript had just taken a dangerous turn. A missing manuscript, a locked library, and now a scream in the storm. The chase leads into the darkened archives, where shadows guard more than just books. The cry echoed down the stairwell, chilling every soul in the reading room. Clara Dane's pulse quickened, but her voice remained calm. Upstairs. Quickly. Officer Brooks was already bounding toward the steps, flashlight in hand. Clara followed, her sensible shoes tapping against the marble floor, the crowd murmuring behind her. The library's second floor was a labyrinth of archives, tall shelves packed with town records, rare volumes, and fragile newspapers bound in leather. The air smelled of dust and ink, heavy with history. The electric lights flickered under the storm's strain, casting long, jagged shadows. Who screamed? Brooks called, his beam sweeping the gloom. From between the shelves emerged a trembling figure. Harold Finch, the library's longtime custodian. His lantern shook in his hand, casting nervous light across his lined face. I saw someone," he stammered. Near the archives vault. A man in a dark coat, running. He slipped inside. Clara's sharp eyes flicked to the end of the aisle, where a heavy iron door stood ajar. The archives vault, normally kept locked tight. "Stay here," Brooks ordered, drawing his revolver. But Clara placed a steady hand on his arm. "Careful. If the thief is cornered, desperation makes for dangerous company." Together, they approached the vault. The storm howled through a cracked window pane, rattling the door. Inside, the air was cooler, the walls lined with cabinets of manuscripts and rare letters. At the center, an overturned chair lay near a table, and on the floor, fresh drops of water, leading deeper into the vault. "He came in soaked," Clara whispered, kneeling to examine the trail. "Rainwater from outside. He must have slipped through when the back door slammed." Brooks scanned the shadows, gun ready. "Then he's still here." Suddenly, a shape darted between shelves. Brooks shouted, "Stop," and gave chase. Clara hurried after them, her lantern bobbing. The vault rang with the echo of footsteps, quick and sharp. The figure turned, lantern light catching his profile for a fleeting instant. Clara glimpsed a sharp jaw, rain-slicked hair, and eyes filled with panic. Then he vanished around the corner. "Block the exit," Clara called. "He'll try to double back." They raced through the maze of shelves, but when Brooks rounded the corner, he stopped short. The aisle was empty. The thief had vanished as if into thin air. Clara caught up, breathing hard, eyes scanning every shadow. Then she noticed something. A cabinet slightly ajar, the edges damp with rain. She pulled it open. Inside was no manuscript. Only a scrap of cloth, torn from a sleeve. She held it up. He hid in here, then slipped past while we searched. Clever, but careless enough to leave a trace. Brooks cursed under his breath. If he's loose in the library again, we'll never keep order downstairs. Before Clara could reply, Finch the custodian hurried into the vault, still trembling. Miss Dane, he whispered, I swear I saw him take something from the shelves before he ran. Clara's eyes widened. Not the manuscript? No, Finch said, shaking his head. Something smaller. A letter, maybe. An envelope. Clara frowned. If the thief's goal was only the manuscript, why risk exposure by taking more? Unless the manuscript itself was just part of a larger secret. The storm boomed outside, rattling the windows until one cracked with a sharp report. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Clara steadied herself, the torn cloth still in her hand. Then, from the far end of the vault, came the unmistakable sound of a cabinet door slamming shut, and a low voice muttering in the dark. Someone else was still inside the archives. In the storm-lashed library, the archives whispered of stolen pages and hidden hands. But now, another voice stirred in the vault, and with it, fresh danger. The sound of the cabinet slamming echoed through the vault like a gunshot. Clara Dane froze, her lantern held high, eyes narrowing toward the shadows. Officer Brooks raised his revolver, tense and ready. Show yourself, he barked. For a moment, there was only the hiss of rain against the windows and the soft drip of water from the thief's trail. Then came a voice, low, steady, and strangely calm. Put the gun down. You don't want to make this worse. Clara's sharp ears caught a faint quaver in the tone, not of menace, but of desperation. She stepped forward, ignoring Brooks's warning hand. Who are you? She asked. Why hide in shadows when all you've done is make yourself look guilty? From the far row, a man emerged, tall, gaunt, his coat damp with rain. His hair clung to his forehead, his eyes shifting uneasily in the lantern light. In his hand, not a weapon, but a folder of aged papers tied with string. Brooks stiffened. Drop it, now. The man hesitated, then shook his head. You don't understand. If these papers fall into the wrong hands, it will destroy more than a reputation. It will ruin this town. Clara studied him carefully. His voice was strained but earnest. What's your name? She asked. He swallowed. Thomas Reed. I was Elliot Harrow's secretary, many years ago. A ripple of shock ran through Clara. Harrow had died decades earlier, his final years shrouded in mystery. Few had ever spoken of his household staff. His secretary? She repeated. And you expect us to believe you simply appeared tonight, when his manuscript vanishes? Reed's grip tightened on the folder. I came because I knew it would happen. That manuscript should never have surfaced. Harrow's last years, they weren't what the world imagines. He wrote things, Reed faltered, his voice breaking. Things meant to stay buried. Clara's keen gaze caught the tremor in his hands, the hollow in his cheeks. He was a man haunted, not by guilt alone, but by secrets too long carried. Brooks wasn't moved. Enough talk. Hand over the papers. Reed's eyes flicked to Clara. If you're truly Elliot's blood, he said softly, you'll understand why I can't. Clara stiffened. Elliot's blood? I'm no Harrow. Reed blinked, confused. Then his expression shifted. Not you, her. Sylvia. At the mention of Harrow's niece, Clara's thoughts raced. Sylvia Harrow had stood aloof downstairs, dismissing the manuscript as a curse. Was this folder connected to her reluctance? Reed stepped back, his shoulders brushing against the shelves. I must go, he said urgently. The longer I stay, the more danger there is. Ask Sylvia the truth. She knows more than she lets on. Before Brooks could stop him, Reed darted sideways, shoving a chair into the aisle. The lantern light swung wildly, casting the vault into chaos. By the time they reached the door, Reed was gone, vanished once more into the storm-lashed library. Brooks cursed under his breath. Slippery devil. Twice in one night. Clara bent to retrieve a slip of paper that had fallen from Reed's folder during his escape. She held it to the lantern, her eyes widening. It was a letter, dated 1931, in Elliot Harrow's own hand. The words were blurred with age, but one line stood out. The manuscript is not what they believe. Protect the girl. Protect the truth. Clara's heart quickened. Who was the girl? Sylvia, perhaps? Or someone else? And what truth was Harrow so desperate to conceal? As Clara folded the letter, a sudden boom shook the library, louder than thunder. Downstairs, the crowd screamed. Something, or someone, had struck. A secret letter, a vanished thief, and now a crash from below. The storm outside was fierce, but within Ashford's library, the real tempest was only beginning. Clara Dane hurried down the stairwell, Officer Brooks at her side, lantern light flickering against the walls. The roar from the reading hall grew louder with each step. When they reached the ground floor, a scene of chaos awaited them. The chandelier above the central hall hung precariously, its chain snapped partway, glass prisms scattered across the floor like diamonds. Guests huddled near the walls, voices sharp with fear. Mr. Trent, the librarian, wrung his hands in despair. It fell without warning, he cried. If it had come down fully, it could have killed someone. Clara's sharp eyes scanned the ceiling. The chain hadn't simply broken, it had been sawn halfway through, the jagged metal gleaming fresh in the lantern light. Sabotage, not accident. Who was beneath it? Clara asked. Mrs. Prynne's feathered hat quivered as she pointed a trembling finger. Sylvia Harrow. She was standing right there before it fell. Had she not moved a step, it would have crushed her. All eyes turned to Sylvia, who stood pale and rigid, her handbag clutched tightly to her chest. She met Clara's gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. It seems someone does not want me alive to answer questions. Brooks muttered darkly, or she staged it herself to throw us off the scent. Clara studied Sylvia. The woman's composure seemed rehearsed, her words chosen too carefully. But the genuine fear in her eyes was harder to disguise. Clara tucked away her doubts for later. Listen to me, all of you, Clara announced, raising her voice above the murmurs. This was no accident. Someone is trying to silence us, or frighten us into abandoning the search. But we must not yield. The guests shifted uneasily, some whispering of leaving, though the storm outside made flight impossible. Lightning cracked against the sky, illuminating the tall windows, and for a heartbeat Clara thought she saw a silhouette slip past the glass. A trick of the light, perhaps, or Reed, watching from the darkness. Clara drew the letter from her pocket and approached Sylvia. Your uncle's hand, she said quietly. Dated 1931, he wrote of protecting the girl, and protecting the truth. Tell me, Miss Harrow, do you know what he meant? Sylvia's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted to the others, then back to Clara. Not here, she whispered. Not with all of them listening. Before Clara could reply, Officer Brooks returned from inspecting the broken chandelier. He held a small file in his hand, the kind used to cut metal. Found this beneath the dais. Whoever staged this trap dropped their tool in haste. Mrs. Prynne gasped. Then the culprit is still among us. Clara nodded slowly. Yes, and more desperate than ever. The storm outside intensified, rattling the windows and plunging the lamps into flickering gloom. Trent moved to steady the grandfather clock in the corner as it chimed the hour, its solemn tones cutting through the din. Midnight was fast approaching. Clara turned back to Sylvia, her voice low and firm. You said the manuscript was a curse. You called it a burden. Why? What is in it that someone would kill to keep hidden? Sylvia's hands tightened on her handbag. Because it isn't only a novel, she said finally, her voice barely audible. It's a confession. The room fell silent at her words. A confession? From Elliot Harrow? But to what? Before Clara could press further, the lamps flickered once more, and this time, went out entirely. In the sudden blackness, a single scream pierced the library, sharper and more chilling than the storm. The storm raged outside, but inside Ashford's library, the true darkness had fallen. In the pitch black, fear took hold, and another secret slipped from the shadows. The scream tore through the hall as the lamps died, plunging the library into suffocating blackness. The thunder outside rattled the very walls, and for a moment, panic broke loose. Stay calm. Clara Dane's voice rang out, steady as a schoolmistress quieting an unruly classroom. Do not move about, you'll only make matters worse. Her hand fumbled for her lantern, but in the confusion, it slipped and clattered to the floor. A pair of footsteps raced past her in the dark, quick, deliberate, and retreating. Then came a crash of glass from the far end of the hall. Officer Brooks barked an order. Nobody leave this room. His voice was followed by the metallic click of his revolver. Clara crouched, groping until her fingers closed on the lantern. She struck a match, its flare momentarily blinding, before the wick caught and spread a thin circle of light. Shapes emerged. Frightened faces, trembling hands, the glint of rain-soaked windows. Mrs. Prynne clutched at her pearls, pale as chalk. Mr. Trent mopped his brow with a handkerchief. Sylvia Harrow stood rooted in place, her handbag still clutched fiercely against her side, her face unreadable. "Who screamed?" Clara demanded. From the shadows of the corner, a trembling voice replied. "It was I." Harold Finch, the custodian, stepped forward, his lantern now lit as well. His face was drawn, his eyes wide. "I stumbled in the dark and thought someone brushed past me. It gave me such a fright." Clara's sharp gaze lingered on him a moment longer. His clothes were dusted with cobwebs, as if he'd come from some hidden corner of the archives. Yet his trembling seemed genuine. The broken glass drew her next. Crossing the hall, she raised her lantern to the shattered window. Rain poured through the jagged gap, wind howling like a wounded beast. "This is where the sound came from," she murmured. Brooks joined her, jaw tight. "Looks like our thieves slipped outside." Clara shook her head. "No, look at the sill." She pointed to the dry wood beneath the jagged glass. "The rain hasn't touched it yet. The window was broken from outside, not within." Brooks frowned. "Then someone was trying to get in." Clara nodded grimly. "Perhaps our missing secretary, Mr. Reed." The guests muttered uneasily, huddling closer together as the storm rattled the broken frame. Clara turned back to Sylvia. "You said the manuscript was a confession. If Reed was Elliot Harrow's secretary, perhaps he knows the same secret. What is it you're both afraid will come to light?" Sylvia's lips tightened. She shook her head. "Not yet. Not until I'm certain." Clara's patience thinned. "Miss Harrow, lives are already in danger. Your uncle's work has drawn thieves, liars, and would-be killers. If we are to stop this, we must know the truth." Before Sylvia could answer, Finch gasped and pointed. "There, on the floor." They all turned. Near the broken glass lay a single page, wet and half-torn, plastered against the boards by the wind. Clara bent to retrieve it, her heart quickening. The handwriting was unmistakable. Elliot Harrow's flowing script. The words leapt out. "The night she died was no accident. The guilt is mine to bear." Gasps rippled through the group. Mrs. Prynne clutched at her chest. "Good heavens, he confessed to a death?" Clara steadied the page in her hand, mind racing. A confession, indeed. But whose death? And what terrible truth lay waiting in the rest of the manuscript? Before she could ponder further, Brooks hissed, "Lanterns down." For in the broken window, silhouetted by lightning, a figure stood watching, drenched, motionless, and waiting. Lightning framed him like a ghost of the storm. A silent figure at the broken window, staring into the trembling crowd within. The lantern light flickered across pale, frightened faces. Clara felt her own pulse drum in her throat as the figure outside stood unmoving, drenched in rain, framed by the jagged shards of broken glass. His hat brim cast a shadow over his eyes, but there was no mistaking the deliberate stillness. A predator waiting for his chance. Brooks raised his revolver with a sharp command. "Show yourself." But just as the thunder cracked overhead, the figure melted back into the darkness, swallowed by the sheets of rain. By the time Brooks leaned out the shattered frame, there was nothing but storm and silence. "He was there," Mrs. Prynne whispered, her hand clutching her pearls so tightly the strand threatened to snap. "Watching us like wolves circle lambs." Clara crouched near the sill, examining the splinters. "The rainwater hasn't pooled here long. He couldn't have been standing there more than a minute. Which means..." She lifted her lantern toward the muddy grounds beyond the window. "He's close. Too close," muttered Brooks, lowering his revolver but not his guard. Mr. Trent, ever the newspaperman, scribbled furiously in his pocket notebook. "This is something, Miss Dane. First a missing manuscript, now a confession of murder, and strangers prowling the windows. Willow Creek will be buzzing." Clara snapped her gaze toward him. "This is not a story for headlines, Mr. Trent. Not yet. Every careless word risks tipping our culprit's hand." Trent pursed his lips but said no more. Sylvia Harrow stood apart, her face pale but her voice firm. "It was him," she whispered. "Reed, my uncle's secretary. He knew about the manuscript. He may even have helped conceal it. If my uncle truly wrote a confession, Reed would never let it see the light of day." Clara studied her carefully. "What death does your uncle confess to? If we knew, the pieces might fall into place." Sylvia hesitated, then shook her head, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. "It isn't my secret to tell. Not yet." A low grumble of frustration passed Clara's lips. Secrets were spreading in this hall faster than the storm outside. And every one of them was dangerous. Finch the custodian shuffled closer, lowering his voice. Detective Dane, I've been minding this library near 15 years. There's talk among the staff. Whispers Elliot Harrow's wife didn't pass a fever, like the town believes. Some say she fell from the gallery above this very hall. A hush fell over the group at his words. The storm outside seemed to punctuate the revelation with a violent crack of thunder. Fell, or was pushed? Clara asked softly. Finch shrugged helplessly. No one ever proved a thing. But if that page is true, Harrow blamed himself. Clara folded the fragment carefully. Then our missing manuscript may contain the full truth. A truth worth killing for. Brooks drew in a breath through his teeth. Which means our friend outside the window might try again. As if on cue, the lantern flame sputtered, threatening to die in the draft from the shattered frame. Clara shielded it with her palm, her mind racing. If Reed, or whoever the watcher was, wanted the manuscript hidden, they would not stop at intimidation. From above, a sudden creak echoed through the gallery. All eyes turned upward. The floorboards groaned again, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing overhead. Someone was already inside the library. The storm outside battered the windows, but inside the library, another storm brewed overhead. Heavy footsteps creaked across the gallery, slow and deliberate, as though the shadows themselves had learned to walk. The group stood frozen, their faces tilted toward the darkened gallery above. Each groan of timber seemed louder than the last, echoing through the cavernous hall. "Who's up there?" Brooks barked, raising his revolver toward the ceiling. No answer came. Only another step, and another. Whoever prowled the gallery wanted them to know it. Clara Dane's mind sharpened. She raised her lantern, casting pale light on the high railings. Nothing stirred but shadows. "They're circling us," she murmured. Like a hawk above the field. Sylvia Harrow clutched her handbag tighter. "It's Reed. It must be. He's hunting me for what I know. Or for what you carry," Clara said evenly, eyeing the handbag. Sylvia's lips tightened but she said nothing. Brooks motioned to Finch. "Stay with the guests. Miss Dane and I will investigate." Clara nodded. "Keep everyone here. No one leaves this hall." She and Brooks mounted the spiral staircase, each step groaning in protest. The higher they climbed, the louder the storm seemed to grow, rattling every pane of glass. Clara's lantern threw long, wavering shadows along the wall, their movements like figures darting in the corner of the eye. At the top, the gallery stretched into darkness, lined with tall shelves that reached the vaulted ceiling. The air was close, thick with dust and old paper. Clara raised her lantern. "Mr. Reed?" Her voice rang firm, steady. "Or whoever you are, show yourself." Silence. Then, a shuffle. Brooks swung around. There. The beam of Clara's lantern caught the briefest flicker of a coat vanishing between two shelves. Brooks lunged forward, revolver at the ready. Clara followed, her heart pounding with the thrill of the chase. The gallery bent into a narrow aisle. Dust motes glittered in the lantern light. But the figure was gone. "Impossible," Brooks muttered. "He couldn't have slipped past us." Clara ran her hand along the shelf. Her fingers brushed a groove in the wood. She pressed. The panel shifted with a soft click, revealing a narrow door, half hidden in the bookcase. "A passage," she whispered. No wonder the sound moved so strangely. Brooks cursed under his breath. Harrow built this place like a fortress, with secret corridors to match. Clara leaned close, listening. Faint echoes drifted from the passage beyond. A door slamming, quickened steps. Whoever had prowled the gallery was already slipping deeper into the library's veins. Clara turned to Brooks. "He knows these passages. He can watch us from anywhere." Down below, a shriek broke the air. Clara and Brooks raced back to the railing. In the hall beneath them, Mrs. Prynne had dropped to her knees, her pearls scattered across the floor. Finch knelt beside her, clutching her shoulder. "It's gone," she cried. "My bag, gone." Clara's eyes darted across the group. Sylvia still clutched her handbag like a shield. Mr. Trent patted his coat nervously, his notebook in hand. But Mrs. Prynne's satchel, which had hung at her side all evening, was missing. Clara's voice rang out. "When did you last see it?" Mrs. Prynne sobbed. "Just a moment ago. Then, someone brushed past me. I thought it was the storm draft, but, oh heavens, they took it." As thunder shook the library once more, A voice rang out from the secret passage behind Clara, low, taunting, and far too close. "You'll never find what's mine." The taunting voice drifted from the hidden corridor, weaving through the storm's fury, as if the very walls of Ashford's library had learned to whisper their secrets. Clara whipped her lantern toward the secret door, its flame trembling. Brooks steadied his revolver, his jaw set. "Come out," he barked. Silence. Then footsteps, soft, retreating, vanished into the guts of the passage. Without hesitation, Clara pulled the panel wide and stepped inside. The narrow corridor smelled of damp stone and dust. The walls were lined with wooden beams, some carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Drafts seeped through cracks, carrying the murmur of rain. Brooks followed close, revolver raised. "This is a rabbit's warren. He'll run circles around us if we're not careful." Clara pressed forward, her lantern spilling light into the shadows. That voice, it was no stranger's. I've heard tones like it before. Calm, controlled, someone who knows these halls. They reached a fork. One passage sloping downward, the other curling back toward the main library. Clara knelt, raising her lantern to the dirt floor. There, footprints. Recent. Heading down. Brooks grunted. "Then down we go." The passage narrowed until they had to move single file. Ahead, the faintest glimmer of light shone from a crack in the wall. Clara pressed her eye to it and caught a glimpse of the grand hall. The group below milled nervously, unaware that hidden eyes watched their every move. "Spying holes," she murmured. "Harrow designed this library as a stage, and these corridors the wings." A scrape of movement echoed from further ahead. Clara and Brooks quickened their pace, following the sound until the passage opened into a small chamber. Dust lay thick on the floor, but in the center stood an iron chest, its lock broken. Papers spilled across the ground, ink blurred by damp. Clara bent quickly, lifting a page. Harrow's handwriting. Fragments of the manuscript. Her fall was no accident. "My hand, my guilt." Another page bore a single name underlined twice. Sylvia. Clara's stomach tightened. She looked up sharply at Brooks. Not Sylvia Harrow, the niece. Her aunt, Elliot's late wife. Brooks drew in a sharp breath. "Then the confession is true. He killed her." Before Clara could reply, a voice drifted from the darkness beyond the chamber. "Killed, yes, but not as you think." They spun. A figure stepped into the lantern's glow, rain-soaked, haggard, but unmistakable. Jonathan Reed, Elliot Harrow's secretary. His eyes gleamed feverishly, and in his hand he held Mrs. Prynne's stolen satchel. "You," Clara said coldly. "You've been watching us. Stealing. Hiding in the walls like a ghost." Reed's lips curled into a bitter smile. "A ghost is all that remains of Elliot Harrow's legacy. The manuscript is mine. I protected it for years, as he asked. And now you meddle." Clara's gaze narrowed. If Harrow confessed to killing his wife, why protect it? Why not destroy it? Reed's voice cracked, the words half-choked. "Because the truth is not what it seems. Elliot was guilty, yes, but not of murder. He was guilty of silence. Of letting the real killer walk free." The lantern light caught his trembling hands. "The manuscript holds the name. That's why I kept it hidden. If it surfaced, the town would burn with scandal." Before Clara could press him further, a deafening crash resounded from the hall above, followed by Sylvia Harrow's piercing scream. In the storm-lashed library, the last pages of Elliot Harrow's manuscript would be read aloud, and with them, the truth would finally tear free from decades of shadows. Clara and Brooks raced back through the narrow passage, Reed stumbling behind them, still clutching Mrs. Prynne's satchel. Sylvia's scream had frozen the hall in terror. Lanterns swung wildly as Finch and the others crowded beneath the gallery, their faces pale and expectant. Sylvia stood near the broken window, her handbag torn from her grasp, her eyes wild with fear. "He tried to take it," she cried. "The manuscript. He tried to snatch it from me." All eyes darted to Reed as Clara dragged him into the hall. He was breathless, his clothes torn from the chase. "I never touched her," he shouted. "But she carries pages that belong to me, to Elliot." Clara raised her hand sharply. "Enough. The time for shadows is over. We'll read the truth, here and now." From Reed's satchel and Sylvia's handbag, Clara gathered the scattered pages, damp and fragile. She placed them on the lectern at the center of the hall, her lantern casting a golden pool of light over the ink. The storm's fury outside seemed to hush, as if the town itself bent close to listen. Clara began to read. I loved her more than life, and yet it was my silence that condemned her. That night upon the gallery, she quarreled not with me but with another. In the struggle, she fell. I heard the cry, saw the shadows, but I did not speak. I let the town believe it fever, for the truth would ruin us all. And so I lived a coward, bearing the guilt of another's crime. Gasps rippled through the group. Clara's voice steadied as she turned the page. The name I withhold no longer. It was Margaret Prynne who quarreled with my wife that night. My silence shielded her, though my soul withered for it. Let this manuscript bear witness. The guilt was mine for silence, but the deed was hers. All eyes swung to Mrs. Prynne. Her pearls rattled as her trembling hand rose to her mouth. Lies, she cried. All lies. That man, he hated me. He wanted revenge from the grave. But Finch whispered hoarsely, I remember that night. I was just a boy on staff then. I heard voices raised, Mrs. Harrow and you, Mrs. Prynne. I never dared speak it. Clara's gaze hardened. It fits. You feared the truth would resurface. That's why you screamed at the blackout. Why your satchel conveniently vanished. You hoped to draw suspicion away. Mrs. Prynne's composure shattered. Her knees gave way, and she slumped into a chair, sobbing. She taunted me, she confessed in a broken whisper. Said Elliot loved her spirit, not my counsel. I only meant to silence her. I never meant for the railing to break. The room was deathly still. Even the storm seemed to pause its fury. Brooks lowered his revolver slowly. Mrs. Prynne, you're under arrest. Sylvia stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. At last, the truth. My uncle bore her crime all his life. And I bore the shame without knowing why. Reed bowed his head. I tried to shield his memory. Perhaps I was wrong, but better late than never, the truth is spoken. Clara gathered the final page, folding it with care. The manuscript has done its work. Elliot Harrow's silence is broken, and the shadows of Willow Creek may rest. As Brooks led Mrs. Prynne away, the storm broke at last, its thunder rolling into distance. The library stood battered but unbowed, its secrets no longer hidden in the walls. Clara doused her lantern and slipped on her coat. Another case closed, another truth unearthed. Outside, dawn would come soon enough, and with it, a town forever changed. And so, dear listener, the midnight manuscript was read, not to hide, but to reveal. For in every shadowed corner of history lies a truth waiting for light.